Hi, I'm Chelsea of Friday Pattern Company, and today we're doing the Do Top and Dress Sew Along. We're going to be making a dress today, and this dress actually, we're going to make this dress today, and we'll go over the steps for sewing the dress. The steps for sewing the top are pretty much the same, you just have different shaped side seams and you're not doing the pockets. So if you are making the top, you can skip the beginning part where we're joining the pockets to the front and rejoin us when we're assembling the neckline. This fabric that I'm using is a modal jersey that I picked up at Stone Mountain and Daughter Fabrics. It's like so buttery soft and lovely. And this is a beginner level sewing pattern. There's not a ton of steps. It comes together really quickly. Working with knits can be a little bit fiddly, but you know, we take you step by step and give you some tips along the way. So hopefully it's a fun and successful sew. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below and let's sew. So before we start the sew along, make sure that you have all of your pieces cut out, and yeah, let's get started. So once you have your pieces cut out, we're going to snip in at all notches. Notches are these little lines right here that are essentially like marking points or reference points. So just at each notch, you're just going to snip in 1/4 of an inch so that you have those on your fabric. On the arm side binding, you'll see that there's a front arm side and a back arm side with a notch in the middle. And it's pretty, like once we have these away from the pattern piece, it's kind of hard to tell. The back arm side's longer. So I just like to label these. I've written front and back on these so that I can keep track. So now when I go back to sew these, I'll be able to see which side. This side is getting pinned to the front arm side and this side is getting pinned to the back arm side. So that'll just make it a little bit easier for us down the line. We're going to be pinning our pocket binding to our pocket opening right here. So that little curved bump out. Right sides together, I'm going to pin this in place around this curve. So I like to just start here. This pocket binding is a tiny bit shorter than this opening, just to give it a little bit of, it needs to be pulled in a tiny bit so it doesn't gape after you sew it. So very slightly stretching to get this aligned. And then we're going to sew around this curved edge 3/8 of an inch from the edge. So now that we're at our sewing machine, there's a couple things that we want to check. I've switched my sewing machine needle over to a stretch needle, and I've loaded the bobbin up with the right color thread, and I'm ready to go. When we sew the stitches on the Do dress, because it's from a knit fabric, it's for knit fabric, we're using a stretch stitch. So a zigzag or like a lightning bolt or like an overlock stitch, whatever is your preference. I'm going to use a zigzag that is 2.5 millimeters wide and 2.5 millimeters long. When you start to sew on light fabric, it's good to get a hold of your threads behind so that you have a little bit of a tug if you need it, because sometimes these light fabrics want to get pulled down into the feed dogs, but let's see. And sometimes that little tug will just get you going. So there's that seam sewn. Our next step is going to be to wrap this raw edge around our seam allowance. So I've pressed my seam away and I've got my seam allowance down underneath here, and now I'm just going to wrap the pocket around, or I'm going to wrap the pocket binding around the raw edge so that it overlaps that seam, and then I can just pin or clip it in place. It is designed to be extra long so that you can trim it away after we've sewn this next seam and have a clean finish. So I've got my seam allowance all wrapped up, and now I'm going to stitch in the ditch along here. So just right along this, I'm going to use a zigzag stitch straddling that, and it's going to catch the other side of the binding on the wrong side. There, that is sewn. And then we have excess on the back that we're just going to trim away. Just trim carefully so that you don't cut anything except for the excess binding. And there you go. There is our pocket curve finished. And now we're gonna add the pocket behind it. Okay, so here's my front, here's my arm side and my neckline, and then here's the hem, just so that we don't get confused about which way the pocket is going. So we're going to add the pocket with the right side. So I've got my front right side facing down, and now I've got my pocket right side facing down, so that these will be stitched like that, and then we'll see the face. You've got notches on your pocket that match up with notches on your dress, so just matching those up. And then this pocket needs to just be laid out neatly along on here, because we're gonna stitch it, and you'll see the stitch on the face of the dress. So we want to make sure it's nice and that everything is aligned perfectly. So if your fabric needs a press or something like that, just make sure that you do that. And then once you have it kind of nicely laid out, we're going to add a bunch of pins around this curve to hold it perfectly in place. Okay, so now we are going to take this to the sewing machine. We're using our zigzag stitch to sew around this edge, and our zigzag stitch is going to straddle the raw edge of the fabric to enclose it. And we're going to do this as neatly as possible, and you want to make sure that the thread you're using matches the dress, or that it's contrasted in a way you like, because it's going to show on the face. So there we have it stitched around, and then we need to also baste 1/4 inch from the edge, just along here and right here, to secure the pocket in place. So just, it's easier to see on this side, just up to here and up to here. And that's 1/4 inch from the edge. You can use a straight stitch if you want as well. Sometimes it's easier when you're trying to get into like a little space. Here's a close-up of what that pocket looks like finished on the wrong side. So you can see how, because we carefully straddled this line, it kind of almost just blends in to the wrong side, and it looks really nice. And here's the right side. If your thread matches, it won't be super obvious, but you'll still see it, and it is kind of part of the design. But yeah, that's the pocket. Okay, so I've got my back here facing right side up, and then now I'm laying out my front right side down so that these two pieces will be right sides together, and I'm matching up these neckline edges. We're just going to be stitching these little V's. Okay, so now we're going to stitch 3/8 inch from the edge, just going out, pivot, and then back. When you get to the point, you want to make sure your needle is down, and then you can lift your presser foot and you can rotate your project so that you're not starting a new seam, and then you'll just sew down the other side. So here's that little seam, and we are going to just clip in right to this corner without clipping through. That'll just give us a little bit more movement. And then we're going to repeat that on the other side. Okay, so now I have both sides of my neckline sewn, and I'm going to fold the cowl down now, and it pins along the shoulder edge of our arm side. So I'm just folding it down, and then this edge is going to match up. I'm nesting my seams, so this is going to reduce bulk in the arm side. But basically, I'm folding one of my seam allowances in one direction and then the other seam allowance in the other direction, and then matching them up at the seam so that when I baste this in place, it's not like they're not pressed in the same direction, they have like one big hump. It makes it a little narrower. So now we are going to baste just across right here to hold this edge in place 1/4 inch from the edge of your arm side. So there is our neckline finished. As you can see, we've got the cowl folded down in there and then basted in place. I should have said this before the last step, but this gets left raw because knit fabrics don't fray, but if this edge is going to bother you, you can serge it or like do a zigzag stitch however you want to finish it, just so that it looks that way inside of your garment, but it doesn't need to be finished or anything like that. Now I'm flipping my project so that it's right sides together, and I'm going to match up the side seams on the front and the back. Now I'll take this to the machine and I'll sew 3/8 of an inch from the edge going all the way down, and repeat that on both sides. So here I have the side seams sewn up, and again, these don't get finished because they don't need to be finished because they're knit and they're not going to fray. But if you have a serger and you want to serge them up to give the insides of your garment a little bit cleaner of a finish, you're welcome to. And now all we have left is the arm side finish and the hem. So just grabbing our arm side binding piece from earlier, and what you'll do is just sew them right sides together, just the short ends, to make a loop. So now I have these sewn into a loop, and I know that this is the front arm side, this is the back arm side, and this seam is going to go at the underarm seam, and then this notch is going to go at the shoulder seam. So we're going to pin it in place on our dress. Okay, here I've got my dress right side facing up, and I know that because my pocket is right here. And we're going to pin the arm side right sides together with the arm of our dress. So I'm just going to loop this in, and I'm matching up this side seam here and adding a pin, and then I'm matching up this notch with the shoulder seam. And these are going to be shorter than the opening, so they're going to stretch to be, we're going to stretch them so that they are the same length as the arm side. And we can remove these pieces of tape now because I've safely got it pinned correctly, so I can't mix it up now. Well, famous last words. So I'm just going to kind of work my way around the arm side, adding more pins. At the shoulder, you're going to be sandwiching the seam of the cowl. The underside is going to be in a little bit of this shoulder seam, so just make sure that you have that kind of into place. Okay, so now we're going to stitch this right sides together using our 3/8 inch seam allowance going around the arm side. This is kind of similar to when we sewed the little binding on the pocket. We'll stretch slightly as we sew so that the seam is flat going under the presser foot, but we're not stretching out the arm side. So here's the arm binding sewn on and then pressed outward. And then now we're just like we did with the pocket binding, we're just wrapping it around the seam allowance and pinning or clipping it in place. And then we'll stitch in the ditch, and then we'll trim away the excess. Now we're going to stitch right on that seam, catching the other end on the other side. So there's that sewn, and now we're just going to trim away this excess carefully. There's that done, and we're just going to repeat that on both sides. So here is both of the arm sides done, and now all we have left to do is the hem. So I'm going to flip this wrong side out. So for the hem, you just turn it under 3/8 of an inch, and then we're going to stitch it. I'm going to take this to the machine and press it and pin it in place, or I'm going to take it to the iron and press it and add the clips in place, because as you can see, this type of thin jersey wants to like roll, so it gets annoying with like these small things. So I'm going to press, and I'm going to be clipping as I go. So this is how I'm doing it. I'm just rolling it out, giving it a little measure, and then adding a clip. And here is the finished hem. Here's the finished dress. I'm so happy with how it turned out. I'm styling it here with some clogs. I feel like this is like a cool kind of like artsy vibe if I was maybe going out with some girlfriends or for a glass of wine or something mellow. But I think you could also wear this pretty casually with like, you know, more like sneakers and a denim jacket. It's a super versatile dress, and I'm not stiffing my armpits here. I'm just showing you the depth of the arm side on me. And yeah, I have it. I also tried it on with the heather blazer, and I think that looks pretty cute too, the way that the lapels kind of frame the cowl neck. Anyway, I hope that if you sew the do, you have fun, and we'll see you next time. Happy sewing.